Are you ready for some of the most bizarre, shocking, and hilarious stories from ancient Greece? Stories that will make you wonder how the Greeks came up with such crazy ideas and how they influenced our culture and imagination. Stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about mythology and maybe even yourself. If you are, then buckle up because you are in for a wild ride. By learning about these stories, you will not only have fun but also gain insight into the ancient Greek culture, values, beliefs, and worldview. You will also discover some lesser-known facts and events that will surprise you and challenge your assumptions. You will also see how these stories are still relevant and inspiring today as they reflect the human condition and the universal themes of love, power, justice, and destiny. So, if you are curious, adventurous, and open-minded, then stay tuned because we are about to reveal the 11 weirdest Greek mythology stories that you need to know. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you the best content on history, culture, and mythology. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update from us. Now let's get started. Number 1. Tiresias, the androgynous prophet. Tiresias was the son of the nymph Chariclo and the shepherd Everus, and a descendant of the founder of Thebes, Cadmus. He was a blind prophet of Apollo who had the gift of clairvoyance and augury. He lived for 7 generations and participated in many events in Theban history. Tiresias was not always blind nor always a man. According to one version, he was transformed into a woman after he killed a pair of mating snakes. He lived as a woman for 7 years, married and had children. Then he encountered another pair of snakes and changed back into a man. According to another version, he was blinded by Athena after he saw her bathing. As compensation, she gave him the power of prophecy. In both versions, he was involved in a dispute between Zeus and Hera, who asked him who enjoyed sex more, men or women. Tiresias, having experienced both, said that women did. Hera was angry and struck him blind, but Zeus gave him a long life and the ability to understand the language of birds. He represents the fluidity and complexity of gender and sexuality and the wisdom and insight that come from diverse experiences. He also shows the interaction and conflict between mortals and gods and the role of fate and prophecy. Tiresias was a legend that amazed the Greeks and a story that still captivates us today. Number 2. Lamia, the child-eating queen. Lamia was a beautiful queen of Libya who had an affair with Zeus, the king of the gods. However, this made Hera, Zeus's wife, very jealous and angry. She decided to punish Lamia by killing or taking away all her children or making her kill them herself. This drove Lamia mad with grief and rage, and she started to hunt and devour other people's children. She also became ugly and monstrous, losing her human appearance. Lamia was not only a child eater, but also a seducer and a deceiver. She could change her shape and lure young men to her bed and then feed on their flesh and blood. She was also gifted by Zeus with the ability to remove and reinsert her eyes, which gave her some prophetic powers. However, she could not sleep or rest, and she had to keep her eyes in a jar during the day. She was a terrifying creature that haunted the night and a symbol of the dangers of lust and revenge. Lamia was one of the most bizarre and tragic stories in Greek mythology. She represents the consequences of angering the gods and the loss of humanity and sanity. She also shows the contrast between beauty and horror, and the power of love and hate. Lamia was a nightmare that scared the Greeks, and a story that still intrigues us today. Number 3. Actaeon, the hunter-turned-stag. Actaeon was the son of Aristeus and Autonoe, and a descendant of the founder of Thebes, Cadmus. He was a skilled hunter who learned from the centaur Chiron. He loved to roam the woods with his pack of 50 hounds, chasing wild animals. Actaeon's fate was sealed when he stumbled upon the goddess Artemis while she was bathing in a secluded spring on Mount Cithaeron. Artemis was the goddess of hunting, wild animals, and virginity. She was very protective of her privacy and chastity, and she did not tolerate any mortal who saw her naked. She was enraged when she noticed Actaeon's gaze, and she splashed water on his face, cursing him. He felt a sudden change in his body. He grew antlers, fur, and hooves. He had been transformed into a stag, the very prey he used to hunt. Actaeon tried to flee, but he could not speak or call for help. He ran into his hounds, who did not recognize him, and attacked him with ferocity. He was torn apart by his loyal companions, who thought they had caught a magnificent trophy. He died a horrible death as a victim of divine wrath and irony. He represents the danger of trespassing into the sacred and forbidden realms of the gods and the punishment for violating their honor and dignity. He also shows the contrast between the hunter and the hunted, and the reversal of roles and fortunes. Actaeon was a nightmare that haunted the hunters. Number 4. Hermaphroditus, the half-man, half-woman. Hermaphroditus was a beautiful youth, the son of Hermes and Aphrodite, the gods of communication and love. He was born with male genitals, but he had a feminine appearance and voice. He wandered the world in search of adventure and romance. Hermaphroditus encountered a nymph named Salmacis, who fell in love with him at first sight. She tried to seduce him, but he rejected her advances. She pretended to leave, but hid in a nearby pool of water. When Hermaphroditus bathed in the pool, she embraced him and prayed to the gods that they would never be separated. The gods granted her wish and fused their bodies into one. Hermaphroditus became a being that was partly male and partly female. He cursed the pool so that anyone who bathed in it would become androgynous like him. He represents the fusion of masculine and feminine qualities and the loss of identity and autonomy. He also shows the power of love and desire, which could transform a person in unexpected ways. Hermaphroditus was a curiosity that fascinated the Greeks and a story that still challenges us today. Number 5. Baucis and Philemon, the tree hospitality gods. Baucis and Philemon were an old married couple who lived in a humble cottage in the region of Tyana, which Ovid places in Phrygia 1. They were the only ones in their town to welcome disguised gods Zeus and Hermes, in Roman mythology, Jupiter and Mercury respectively, thus embodying the pious exercise of hospitality, the ritualized guest friendship termed xenia or theoxenia when a god was involved. Baucis and Philemon served the gods a simple but generous meal and noticed that the food and wine were miraculously replenished. They realized that their guests were divine and begged for their forgiveness. The gods told them to climb a nearby mountain and not to look back until they reached the top. As they obeyed, they saw that their town was flooded and destroyed, but their cottage was transformed into a temple. The gods granted them a wish, and they asked to be the guardians of the temple and to die together. When they grew old, they were turned into an intertwining pair of trees, an oak and a linden, standing in the sacred grove. Baucis and Philemon were one of the most bizarre and touching stories in Greek mythology. They represent the virtues of hospitality, kindness, and devotion, which pleased the gods and earned them a reward. They also show the contrast between the wickedness and the goodness of human beings, and the power of the gods to punish and protect. Baucis and Philemon were a legend that inspired the Greeks, and a story that still moves us today. Number 6. Procrustes, the one-size-fits-all innkeeper. Procrustes was a rogue smith and bandit who had a very special bed in his inn. He claimed that his bed could fit anyone perfectly, but he had a sinister way of making that happen. He would either stretch or chop off the limbs of his guests to match the length of his bed and then rob them of their belongings. He was the son of Poseidon and the father of another villain, Sinis. Procrustes met his end when he encountered Theseus, the hero who was on his way to Athens. Theseus accepted Procrustes' invitation to stay at his inn, but he was not fooled by his trick. He overpowered Procrustes and gave him a taste of his own medicine. He forced Procrustes to lie on his bed and adjusted his body to fit it, killing him in the process. This was the last of the 6 labors that Theseus performed on his journey. Procrustes was one of the most bizarre and cruel monsters in Greek mythology. He represents the danger of imposing a rigid and arbitrary standard on others without regard for their individuality or well-being. He also shows the folly of trying to deceive a clever and strong hero like Theseus, who always found a way to overcome his enemies. Procrustes was a nightmare that haunted the travelers and a story that still warns us today. Number 7. Empusa, the shape-shifting demoness. Empusa was a spirit or phantom who could change her appearance to frighten or seduce travelers. She was associated with the goddess Hecate, who ruled over magic and the underworld. Empusa had one leg of bronze and another of cow dung, or sometimes a donkey's leg. She could also transform herself into a cow, a mule, a dog, or a beautiful woman. Empusa was not just a scary creature, but also a deadly one. She would lure young men to her bed and then feed on their flesh and blood like a vampire or a succubus. She especially craved the blood of young and pure men, whom she would fatten up before devouring them. She could be driven away by insults or mockery, which would make her shriek and run. Empusa was one of the most bizarre and terrifying monsters in Greek mythology. She represents the fear of the unknown, the dark, and the deceptive. She also shows the danger of lust and temptation, which could lead to a horrible death. Empusa was a nightmare that haunted the Greeks, and a story that still fascinates us today. Number 8. Dionysus and the pirates transformed into dolphins. Dionysus was the god of wine, revelry, and ecstasy, who was born from the union of Zeus and a mortal princess named Semele. He was a patron of theatre, fertility, and nature, but he also had a dark side. He could inflict madness, frenzy, and vengeance on those who opposed or offended him. One of his most bizarre adventures involved a group of Tyrrhenian pirates who captured him as he traveled among the islands of the Greek Aegean. They planned to violate the pretty boy and then sell him into slavery, despite the warnings of their helmsman who recognized him as a god. In anger, Dionysus filled their ship with spreading vines and phantom beasts, and when the pirates leaped into the sea, he transformed them into dolphins. The only one who was spared was the helmsman, who had tried to protect Dionysus. The god rewarded him with a golden vine and a prophecy of his future. He also made him his companion and follower and taught him the secrets of his cult. The helmsman became a priest of Dionysus and spread his worship throughout the lands. This story illustrates the dual nature of Dionysus, who could bring joy and sorrow, life and death, depending on how he was treated. It also shows his power over the sea and the animals, as well as his connection to the vine and the wine. It is a story of transformation, both physical and spiritual, that reveals the mystery and paradox of the god. Number 9. Echo the nymph, cursed to only repeat words. Echo was a mountain nymph who was punished by Hera, the wife of Zeus, for helping him conceal his affairs with other nymphs. Hera took away Echo's ability to speak on her own and made her only repeat the last words spoken by someone else. Echo then fell in love with Narcissus, a handsome youth who rejected her and became obsessed with his reflection. Echo wasted away from grief, leaving behind only her voice. However, this story is not as ancient or as Greek as it may seem. It was first written by Ovid, a Roman poet who lived in the 1st century BC. Ovid was known for adapting and embellishing Greek myths for his purposes, and he often added elements that were not present in the sources. For example, he was the first to link Echo with Narcissus, who had a separate myth of his own. He also gave Echo a more sympathetic and tragic character, while the earlier Greeks portrayed her as a minor and mischievous figure. Therefore, the story of Echo and Narcissus is not a genuine Greek legend, but a Roman invention. It is a story of unrequited love, self-love, and the power of words. But it is also a story of creative transformation, both by the characters and by the author. It is a story that echoes through time, but it is also a story that changes with each retelling. Number 10. Pan the goat-legged half-man, half-goat. God Pan was the son of Hermes, the messenger god, and a nymph, either Dryope or Penelope. He was born with the horns, ears, legs, and tail of a goat, and the torso and face of a man. He was a cheerful and playful god who loved music, dancing, and chasing nymphs in the woods. He was also the god of wild nature, shepherds, flocks, and rustic music. He played the pan flute, a musical instrument that he invented from the reeds of a river. One of the weirdest stories about Pan involves his encounter with the moon goddess, Selene. Pan was smitten by her beauty and wanted to seduce her, but he knew that she would not be attracted by his goat-like features. So he came up with a cunning plan. He covered his hairy body with a white fleece and hid his face under a shepherd's hat. He then waited for Selene to descend from the sky and offered her a ride on his back. Selene accepted, thinking that he was a gentle and handsome shepherd. She climbed on his back and embraced him, unaware of his true identity. Pan then carried her to a cave, where he revealed himself and made love to her. Selene was surprised, but not displeased, by his deception. She even bore him a son, who was named Lycos, meaning wolf. This story shows the cleverness and charm of Pan, who managed to win the heart of a goddess with his disguise and his flute. It also shows the connection between Pan and the moon, which was associated with madness and lunacy. Pan was known to cause panic, a sudden and irrational fear among humans and animals, especially at night. He was also linked to lycanthropy, the ability to transform into a wolf, which was believed to be influenced by the phases of the moon. Pan was a god of contrasts, who could be both delightful and dreadful, depending on his mood and the situation. Number 11. Sisyphus, the king condemned to push a boulder. Sisyphus was the founder and first king of Ephyra, later known as Corinth. He was a cunning and greedy ruler who killed travelers and guests in his palace, violating the sacred laws of hospitality. He also tricked and cheated death twice, escaping from the underworld and prolonging his life. He even dared to challenge Zeus, the king of the gods, by revealing his secrets and stealing his thunderbolt. For his crimes, Sisyphus was punished by Zeus with an eternal and futile task in the underworld. He had to roll a huge boulder up a steep hill using all his strength and skill. But every time he reached the top, the boulder would roll back down, forcing him to start over again. He could never complete his task, nor rest from his labor. He was doomed to suffer endless frustration and exhaustion, without any hope of escape or relief. This story illustrates the wrath and justice of Zeus, who could not tolerate the arrogance and deceit of Sisyphus. It also shows the futility and absurdity of human existence, which is often compared to the plight of Sisyphus. The philosopher Albert Camus famously used this myth as a metaphor for the human condition and argued that one must imagine Sisyphus happy despite his ordeal. Conclusion. Well, there you have it, 11 of the strangest tales from Greek mythology. From half-man, half-woman beings to immortal nymphs cursed to only repeat words, these ancient Greeks came up with some seriously weird stuff. I hope you enjoyed this tour through mythology's oddest tales. If you want to hear more bizarre stories from ancient legends, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'll be back with another 11 crazy myths from other world folklore. Until then, keep exploring the mythology and who knows, you might find another strange creature or two.